Hey, assalamu alaikum, everyone. This episode of the podcast is a continuation of my conversation with Karim Serageldin, the Islamic counselor. We talked about the courting process, what is courting versus dating, and we also talked about the premarital counseling as well. Premarital counseling from the perspective of someone going to an Islamic counselor to talk about premarital counseling, or even a situation where you have a guy and a girl who are potentially looking to get married and they both would like to do some premarital counseling. We shared some personal experiences. I know I shared some of my personal experiences with courting and premarital counseling, and it was a great conversation. I had a lot of fun, and I can't wait to have him back on. Is it reasonable to say that a person, a guy, typically a guy, could start this marriage process while also trying to let's say reconcile his addiction?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I'm not in any place to tell people what they should and shouldn't do, but my insight simply just comes from my small experience, right? And likelihood of what my understanding of human nature, right? Which is, um, can you really worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you're worshiping another God? No. Can you really devote yourself to school if you're also working three full-time jobs? No, right? The reality is we have limited resources, units of energy, and capacity for will, even on a daily basis. Okay. And so everybody knows their situation. And I do know from, again, cases I've worked with that when men were more connected, sober, they actually, even if their courtship didn't work out, they gained more value and experience from the very process of being in that relationship, right? Because the courtship is about engaging the feminine and figuring out compatibility for long-term sustainability as a partnership. But that has to be done in a realistic way, right?
Sure.
And so some people, when they meet a woman, it's a catalyst for them to be more sober or to progress in their recovery. So in situations like that, that might be a good thing. But if I'm a person who's very insecure still, and at the day she doesn't call me back on when I hope she would, I go act out. That's a person who shouldn't be courting somebody, right? Because their usage of pornography is still, they don't have self-possession, right? If there's more of the addiction is possessing them more than they have their own self-possession, right? So a
Mm.
person who has more of that self-possession is a guy who, let's say, he's been in the program or working on stuff for a year or two, and he's like, dude, she broke up with me and I wanted to act out, or I was going to go to the escort. And I experienced that whole, cycle with my nafs, and I was able not to go. Like, that's a person who I wouldn't tell them you have to stop talking to sisters until you never act out again, because I don't actually believe that's always the case for people, right? You can have extended periods of time of sobriety, and some people, mashallah, they really don't drink again or act out again or watch porn again. That happens too. But a
Mhm.
lot of us, it's a choppy road for a while, especially if I've been using or dependent on something for 5, 10, 20 years even. I mean, again, people who have been starting porn when they're 14 and they're 45 right now, we're talking 30 years, right? And you can't expect after a year of recovery, they're never going to act out again after that. Like, that's not realistic. But it's about frequency and intensity as a measurement that is important to track, right? And the relationship and meaningful associations we make with ourselves, intimacy, relationships, and sexuality, all of that has a lot to do around how we're going to shape the role of pornography in our lives. Make sense?
Mhm. Yeah. Sort of going into the premarital process topic, how would you define this process here of or we can use the word courting, right? How would you define courting?
I mean, my understanding of courting is it's an intentional engagement to explore the personality of another human being for the purposes of marriage and having a family. It's not that that's the classic understanding, right?
Mhm.
Um, so courting
How's that
is,
any different from, let's say, dating?
well, dating, let's say in the United States, could include that, right? But not necessarily. Okay, so if I'm 17 and I'm dating Jenny in high school, and the whole goal is to get laid before college, I'm not courting her, am I?
Mm.
There's no
Right.
intentional process to engage this person on a practical sense to see if we can have a marriage and a sustainable family for the future. None of that is part of the conversation, right? That's dating. I'm with somebody, we hang out, we have good times, right? There may be sexual or not activity, but the point is the mentality is it's about being in a relationship, having validation, right? It depends on your age, you know? Doesn't mean a 17-year-old can't court somebody, they can, but that's the difference, right?
Mhm.
Is now dating in the West, once you hit a certain age, especially women, right? They hit the wall at 25. After that, all they're dating for men, even though they do everything they do according to what's appropriate for the couple, they're expecting that it will lead to a courtship. Subhanallah, right? Even the
Mm.
Western woman's like, where is this going? We hear that all the time, right? Where is this going? If he doesn't propose to me in 2 years, I'm leaving him. I know women who've said that, like they've talked to me about this, like their boyfriends and stuff. Like he's not serious. So they want to be courted,
Mm.
essentially, right? So that's the difference. So what do you understand the difference to be? I hope I was
I,
clear.
well, no, it was clear. I use the word courting over dating. Like I've had instances where I'm having a conversation with someone and I bring up the word courting instead, and I'm like, whoa, that's so formal, right? Like, why courting? And I like courting. I like to use the word courting because the idea is that you want this to lead to a marriage. That's where this is going. Whereas
Exactly.
dating is just
Could
more,
lead
well,
to anything else.
could
Could
lead
lead
to
to other
anything
things.
else. There's no certainty, there's no security, there's no guarantee necessarily. This is just maybe you're doing it for fun. That's why I don't like to use the word dating or recording.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that's useful about it is, formalities in general in society. One of the things that's useful about them is they create social expectations, right? That's
Mm.
why when people follow formalities, it makes strangers feel more safe, have safety and predictability around others. You understand? So when you go to a doctor's office or you go to somebody's house, like there's formalities, right? Courtship also has the formality of what's nice about it is that both people know if we both feel like this is not going to work, we're going to end it and walk away. And we're not going to drag it out and the sex is going to keep us entangled. Like that happens in dating a lot, right? I don't know if he wants to marry me. I don't want to leave him in case he's going to propose, right? The guy's not thinking, may propose, may not, but he also, is enjoying how things are going. It's like there is unpredictability. There's no formality. That's why they have to usually create it in dating. And it's usually by the feminine. We have to have a talk. I need to know what this relationship means. That's them seeking the formality of courtship. Ultimately, they want to know, are you in or are you out? Because if you're not in, what do women always say, no one?
I'm out of here. Like,
I'm out of here, right? Because
I'm
why would
leaving.
they stay? Of course,
Yeah.
there's no reason for them to stay, and they also their time is way more sensitive than ours.
Mm.
It's like 100 times more sensitive than ours, right?
Mm.
So that's subhanallah the nature of the feminine. So courting is about giving both people that safety predictability that we both know why we're trying to have a relationship right now. We both know if the relationship doesn't give us enough data to suggest long-term sustainability, we're going to end it and move on. We're not going to waste too much time here. Like nobody should be courting for 5 years, right? And if they are,
Mm.
it's because they're having sex or they're in some weird, ridiculous long distance family political situation, right? Who knows, right? But that shouldn't be the case.
So how does a Muslim in the West, let's say, how do they stay true to their principles, but also try to be pragmatic given the day and age? Like, for example, as a personal story, 3 years ago, I would have totally been against the idea of if I was courting with a sister, we could meet up at Starbucks or something. 3 years ago, I would have thought like, oh gosh, I would never do something like that. It's wrong, et cetera, et cetera. But
But why is that? Why did you think that at the time, and why was it wrong? Why did you
at
make
the
meaning of it
time,
that way?
I felt that it could have led to something that, let's say, would not have been, permissible in the Islamic paradigm. And so that was always my fear, was let me just cut it off in the beginning or prevent it in the beginning so that it doesn't lead to somewhere worse. Whereas today, honestly, I don't have a problem with it. I think, it's almost necessary for a Muslim in the West to, if they want to get to know someone, do it in a public, do it in a public place where like you two meet. Yeah, it's at a coffee shop, right, where there's people around, and use something like that, right? So just to sort of, to reiterate the question is like, yeah, how do we stay true to our principles but also be pragmatic? Because it's a really fine line. It's a thin line.
Yeah, I mean, I think socio-cultural environment actually plays a bigger role in human psychology than anything else, right? Because even religion, no matter what religion you are, it's expressed through the culture, right? If the Prophet Muhammad SAW was Japanese, or Jesus SAW was, Chinese, all of our art, religious art in the Abrahamic traditions would be Asian looking, right? Not Semitic and so forth, right? Um, and so the culture has a lot to do with what's considered formal expectations in society. Now, while I do think that in some cases, depending again on the young man and woman, having a coffee out somewhere could be very appropriate and useful. I don't think that should be in in absence though of having family involvement, let's say, right? If you're serious with somebody. So like there's again just so many different models, right? But I think finding a balance between individual autonomous exploration as well as family feedback and involvement is a way to keep things safe and to have your principles adhered to. If you're trying to do a bunch of courting things on your own, right, over and over and over again, and you find yourself doing things against your principle, then obviously you're not using a good method, right? You're kind of lying to yourself, right?
Mhm.
Because half the time we don't want our parents to know is because we don't want the relationship to be affected or to end or to be dictated in a certain way, which I understand, right? But there's also a safety net to that. You follow? And so, for example, if I'm dating somebody or courting a young Muslim person, but I know my parents will never accept them because they're not my ethnicity. That's just how my parents think. But I don't want to bring my parents into it or let her parents involve mine because I actually am enjoying the relationship, like the emotional intimacy, someone to talk to me. So we have different reasons why sometimes we'll do things, right? So, and sometimes we don't want them to be involved and we want to keep seeing them in public because we just want that sense of, let's say, influence or control over the contours of the relationship, right? Either person can feel that way. So that's one way to think, check yourself before you wreck yourself, is if you keep doing, if you keep trying to get married to, fulfill your deen, but you're doing it completely independently and in secret all the time with all these Muslim girls, like that's probably not a good sign. Make sense?
Yeah. That's probably why a lot of these apps have taken off and have such popularity with Muslims, like with young Muslims, like Salams or Muzmatch. I know, like almost most people that I know who are trying to get married, they've been using these apps like Salams and Muzmatch. And to be honest, I mean, I see it as fairly successful. I know two people personally. They found their spouse using Salams, using that app. And in
Mhm.
your work, do you often get told by your clients that they are using this app or using some sort of website? Do you see that more common today than, let's say, like 10 years
Basically,
ago?
oh yeah, dude. It used to be websites, right? But now it's always these two apps, like you're talking about, like the guys talking to different sisters through these apps. And I think that's great, right? In this, again, everything I can press a button right now and get access to thousands of years of wisdom on the Quran, and I can also get access to the whole collective libido of demonic sexuality, right? Just like that, So let's be real. The apps is a great way to filter, cluster, right, data of the pool of Muslims in your nation or your city, and be able to, filter and connect with people. I think that's really good, right? But what's damaging about it is if we don't take it to a more sophisticated human mature level, right? After that. So people who tell me I've been talking to a sister for 6 months and I think I'm going to marry her, and the whole damn time they've only been texting, they've never talked on the phone or video or something. It's like, I mean, it doesn't happen that often, but it certainly does happen enough where it's something to mention. Like, guys, that's not real connection or communication, right? It's like we've
Yeah.
been duped by the digital world to the extent that we forgot the human element to this very human rite of passage of getting married and starting to breed and contribute to the species here. Like, there's a lot of human, mammal down skin to skin. You got to connect with someone. You can't base it on some artificial personality online, right? So
Mm.
those apps are useful to the degree that they help you connect with people. And then I would offer a general advice that if you connect with somebody, if you guys are connecting, quite consistently, like on a daily basis or a few times a week, within a month, you should be on video calls with that person
Yeah.
as your main form of contact. You can still text because you need to, right? Like, oh, I'll be late, I won't talk tonight, or hey, I thought about you, check out this article, or blah, 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 inside joke, no problem. But the basis of your relationship, especially if it's long distance, has to be like this, because that's your best bet to determine if you know this person. And then I would also argue nobody should marry anybody they've never met, right? And meeting them once usually isn't enough. I mean, it wouldn't be for me, but some people might, it might be, right?
Mhm.
Because again, it depends on how you feel around them, right? Like your heart knows sometimes, like the tranquility and this and that, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes makes it very easy and clear for people, right? For sure. But I'm speaking practically, right? I would never let any of my children marry someone they've never met many times or we've met, and because you have to experience people. You can't, how many of us would really, really want to buy a car we've never driven, even though we've watched videos on YouTube on it and read articles about it, we talked to our friends about it. Most of us wouldn't. Most of us wouldn't buy a pair of sneakers we never tried on, right? And I'm not even talking about trying the person on. I'm just talking about just meeting them.
Yeah.
you know so basic, but some people haven't met, or they
Yeah.
only met one time and so forth. So that's part of the benefit of digital connecting us to people potentials in other states. But at the same time, you have to put in more effort and energy if you do something long distance. That's why I would give everybody the advice is exhaust you know your area, and then like all the states surrounding you, like just focus on that radius, right?
Mm.
Because it's just going to be easier for you to really get to know them and visit them and maximize that place first, right? It's harder to do things long distance. Long distance relationships always suffer more than you think.
Yeah. They're tough. I was in a long distance relationship once, and I was courting a sister, and things went well, but the problem was that, well, I ended up ending things with this particular sister because we had planned to the day that we were going to meet was also the day we were going to get engaged. And I felt excuse me, I felt an immense amount of pressure to the
Uh,
point where I was like, man, how am I supposed to know if this is going to work? I've never met her before. She lives in a completely different state. So it's not like I can go every weekend to fly out to see her. I can't afford that, right? And so I just felt like it wasn't right. My heart was telling me like, no, like this does not feel right at all. This is not normal.
yeah, I
And so I
couldn't
just had to
imagine
back
that.
out.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you did that, man. Like, you're just like, it's so much anxiety to meet a girl or a woman that you're interested in for the first time. Like, that alone is like huge for a lot of people, right? And then it's like, oh my God, it's the first time I'm gonna meet her. And today I'm getting engaged to her. Like, it's just, yeah, I'm glad that computed.
Yeah.
But what got you to a place to even agree to do that? I'm interested to know about that process.
Well, I do want to mention something I forgot to mention was that we did video call. So it wasn't like I'd never seen her, let's say, through at least some sort of lens, like a video call. So we did video call, we would text and, talk on the phone as well. But what led to that was that I felt that things were going well enough to move it to this stage, to advance it to this stage of getting engaged to someone. I'd spoken to her mother, excuse me, I spoken to her father. My mother had spoken to her mother, and so things were going well. Like, I was looking for apartments here in the area. I was checking out expenses, like, okay, how much is this going to cost, right? How much is this on a monthly basis? So things were going well, but you know, again, it's just that my heart was saying, this doesn't feel right. This feels way too rushed, and
Yeah.
this just did not seem right to me. It didn't seem right.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you should always listen to your gut, people. Your gut's just your deeper sense of self telling you something. And look, in a situation like that, it's like, again, there's nothing wrong with getting engaged if you were to engage her, right? But it's also, there's nothing wrong with ending an engagement after too. Like, people often think, like, again, engagement is just a formal way that we socially say we're the families and the individuals are committed to continuing this process forward. But at any point, a big red flag comes up. Nobody should be afraid to stop that process. Nobody. That's a big mistake too that I think is important for everyone to hear. It's like, if you get engaged, especially if you get engaged very quick, expect that things could end very quick. It's
Yeah.
like, and nobody should feel rushed into something like that, ever.
That's the one thing I cannot stand. That's like a pet peeve of mine. The idea that, oh, you're engaged. Well, it's too late now. You can't end it. It's like, why can't you end it? It doesn't make
Capital
any sense.
BS. Capital
Yeah,
BS.
exactly.
That's usually just pressure from the families or the parents, or
Absolutely.
yeah, that's all it is, dude. It has nothing to do
Mm.
with any laws of nature, honestly. It's just formalities, and if formalities are social expectations. Just because I go against your social expectation doesn't mean I'm committing a sin or breaking a law, right? Sometimes I'm doing a good thing because cycles of pattern continue to be passed on in tradition when we don't question them, right? No matter how harmful or impractical they can be. Right? So we have to do that once in a while, especially if it's our truth, before Allah. Like, no, no, it's a mistake.
Do arranged marriages have any prevalence in today's era?
Absolutely, arranged marriages are a common formal way for multiple cultures, families within many cultures, whether in the West, in the East, and everywhere, dude. It still happens a lot. Probably happens more so than what we call Western dating, right? Think about it. Where's most of the planet right now, are what two ethnicities? India and China, dude. Do you think they're doing more arranged marriages and courting, or westernized dating, so to speak? Not that it doesn't exist, right? But the majority of people, they're not the elites living in, the rich towers of the city, dude. Most of the people are just the people,
Yeah.
right? So they're doing arranged marriages. Now, what's an arranged marriage? The way I define it is when you utilize family social capital to network and filter out opportunities or potential mates for you to be introduced to. So it's essentially what apps do in the digital world, we're doing in a human societal world. That's what arranged marriage is. It's filtering all that out, swiping. But who's doing the swiping? It's usually the elders, right? Typically. If a person can get involved with that, and I've seen many situations where, like, the mom and aunt and grandma are sitting with the daughter or the son, and they're looking at the biodatas together, or they're talking about the different, children of their family friends that they know. Like, this happened. I mean, I even grew up with, oh, what about this girl? What about that? And uncle and auntie this, their daughter grew up. She's really cute now. You should check her out next time we go to their house. All that is part of arranged marriages. It's utilizing social family capital to a network for filtering out people that could be potential mates for you. Now, arranged marriages are often sometimes synonymous with, like, you're being forced into something, but that's not what I'm defining here, right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
we're defining is a process. When arranged marriage is forced, right? It's bad. Anything is bad when it's forced, right? It doesn't matter, because at that point it's not arranged. It's a forced marriage. It becomes a forced marriage. Just because the mom arranged it herself for you, means it's still a forced marriage, right? Because your mom could arrange 10 people. If you say no to all of them, you're not forced, but you're in a process of arranged marriages, right? Arranged
Mm.
system. Makes
Yeah.
makes sense?
Yeah. And that's how I've always understood arranged marriages, at least now that I've gotten older, is that an arranged marriage is essentially like consent between the the child and the parents that they are going to together and go through this process of looking for a spouse for that child, of course with the child's consent, right? Rather than a forced thing where it's like, no, you have to choose her, you have to choose him because he's from the same tribe or we know their family or whatever. um,
Right.
for arranged marriages though, I've always come across one of the statistics for arranged marriages that they typically, compared to a non-arranged marriage, they're less likely to end in something like divorce in arranged marriage. So how successful are arranged marriages in your own line of work that you've seen?
Well, most of the immigrant population um, have undergone some kind of family formality and networking via the pipes of arranged marriages, right? Because when you're home, like if you're still in your country of Egypt, Pakistan, and so forth, it's more, and you got married there, it's more likely it was through an arranged relationship, right? Arranged setup. I think that in the uh, arranged marriages statistically may work more so in our context of our culture back home, or even if they were arranged there and they come here to the United States and they remain married. Statistically, I think that's stronger, not necessarily because, all of our moms and aunties are amazing matchmakers necessarily, right? It's more so because of the social systematic network, which puts that pressure, right, on us, the expectation on us, right? Social expectation is a very powerful driving force. Humans are so social that we will deny objective truth if 10 other people are saying, you know, the line isn't there and I see the line. I would rather deny my truth if it means risking bonding with people. This is our nature,
Mm.
right? And so when we have an arranged marriage and thousands or hundreds of people know about it, right? Or they were at our weddings and it's all of our families and half of her family are distant cousins of my, like, it's really hard to come out of that because you're not in love, right? Or you don't feel respected or you're just not getting along, right? It's like people, it also depends on, again, your conditioning and programming. Like people who grew up in tough lives, dude, they don't consider depression, they don't define depression or happiness the same way somebody who's, let's say, more spoiled and pampered would, right?
Yeah.
um, and so everyone has a different like grit to things, right? And so I think that has a lot to do with it too. But I've also spoken to cases where people were in, more so usually cases where they were forced arranged marriages, and those are the ones that typically suffered more or didn't work out, right? Whether they're, and again, these are situations where couples left their homeland and came and lived their life here. But one of the first things people will tell me is like, we were in an arranged marriage. We barely knew each other, or I didn't want to marry this person. One time, often, sadly, with women, right? Sometimes with men too, right? They're forced to marry somebody, right? Like sometimes it's a relative. Sometimes half of your family has US citizenship, the other half is still in third world ruts. And an uncle wants to influence his little brother in Texas, right, to marry his daughter, or else there's going to be problems back home. Like there's all kinds of politics that play roles in our families too, like this. So just again, different insights to consider.
Mm.
But I have 4 kids, right? If I end up, spending most of my life in the U.S. like I already have, Allahu Alam, I'm already thinking about arranged marriages for my kids. In other words, there's, some of my closest friends that have families of their own, right? It's like I'm keeping track. It's like, all right, I've got 3 daughters, mashallah, right? So it's like my friends who have sons, I'm like, oh, I like, he's one of my best friends and he's got 2 sons around the age of my girls. They're gonna, so that's something in the future, I hope to be in contact with a family and arrange them to meet and get to know each other, because that would be a good prospect. Like I know that guy's father since I was in college. Like I trust him. That would be an arranged marriage, right? I would feel more comfortable with that than my daughter saying, "Daddy, look, I met Mahmoud on, whatever it's called, Muslim swipe,
Yeah.
I would feel more comfortable, right? Let's be real, because humans like what's familiar.
Mm.
Things feel more safe and predictable when we know what it is. And there is a truth to meeting random people on an app and our parents go, this is a stranger. How do we know anything about them? That's true. But guess what? That's solvable. Just because they're not from Pakistan or from Egypt or from your network of friends and family doesn't mean they're not worth getting to know. It's a
Right.
Muslim family just like you who showed up here to make a better life for their kids. You just don't know, right? So that's solvable. Like that's not a problem, right? If anything, it could actually increase our community Muslim building relations if we saw it that way. But people are who they are.
Out of trying everything as far as like websites, the whole matrimonial events held at different, banquet halls, um, trying through my parents, trying through the apps, I would say personally, and this is just my opinion, the apps are the most not just convenient, but they're so much better than any other method in my opinion,
Nice.
because much of it is you're doing the work, right? So it's all on you. And if you don't want to be on the app, you just deactivate your account, right? Like, okay, I'm taking a break from courting. But if you want to be on the app, then you're on the app and you get to choose who you want to swipe with. Maybe you do match with someone and the two of you start messaging each other. Like there was this one time I used some Muslim website, right? So this is a website, and the entire time I was actually talking to the mom, not even like the girl herself. And
Hilarious.
I was just like, okay, so when do I actually talk to the girl? And this is a Muslim family with just different perspectives. They have different views on things. And she said, well, you can talk to her once and meet her once. That's it. And I'm like, okay. And then she
Nice.
said something about, she was like, well, it's against our religion of things like um intermixing things like that. And I'm like, I'm not here to be lectured on that. I just wanted to talk to your daughter.
Right.
But yeah, the apps I like, they're great and they've gotten a lot better. I remember the first time I got onto Saddam's. Back then it was called Minder, which
Hmm.
thank God they changed the name because man, that's not had not had a good
Talk about
connotation.
imitation of kuffar right there,
Yeah. So I get on to, at the time it's Minder, I get on and it was interesting, right? Because it's like, oh, this is new, right? There's a Muslim version of, just trying to get married using an app. And now the apps have gotten so much better. Like Sanams, I would say, has just like it. I mean, this is it. This is the app for wanting to get married, a person wanting to get married. If a person wants to start the premarital process, right? Like a young Muslim man, a young Muslim woman, they want to start this premarital process, this courting process. What are some things that they should keep in mind?
I think the first thing is you have to ask yourself, are you a girl or a woman? Are you a boy or a man? And if you don't know how to answer that, then you're not ready. Right? Life skills is very important in general. Again, my general advice to both people, life skills, male and female. But I would have a very different, feedback for men than women, right? As far as because we are essentially expected formally, religiously, and socially to play specific role, right? Just like a woman is objectively likely going to get pregnant and have kids. So that affects the way she's going to be with you in the future and you with her in the future and with the offspring and so forth, right? So I think in general, understanding that difference between what is a boy and a man and a girl and a woman, because there's a lot of boys and girls getting married. They're in their 20s and they're in their 30s. They have salaries, they have jobs, but they're boys and girls in their head, right? They're emotionally, their intimacy, emotional capacity is stunted, repressed, not developed well. People don't know how to regulate emotions. People have very little educational understanding around communication, male female psychology, even sexuality, right? Again, if I've been watching porn for 20 years and then alhamdulillah, I quit for a few years and I get married, that's still, and I've never actually been on a coffee date with a woman before. I've never experienced that, engaged, with a feminine human being in that sense, right? I don't actually know what I'm doing, you know? How am I going to now live with this human, another woman, even though she's my wife and it's how and all that stuff? But it's like, you don't know what you're doing, right? There's whole world and language we have to decode and learn, right? And it is learnable. You follow? To understand people, to empathize, to recognize what emotions are versus just your cognition, to interpret how sensations are in your body when you're around people or when you experience certain in communication or engagements with people. Like that's all self-awareness, human psychology. And if I don't have that basic self-awareness 101 as an individual, you're not going to do so well in a relationship. So a relationship is about you constantly relating to yourself in presence of relating to this other person. There's a feedback loop that goes like this with another person, right? You can't, I don't know what's going on with me. You're not going to do anything for them.
Yeah.
And the woman will know it, right? And isolation and for an alienation emotionally, communicatively for the feminine is like, it's really painful for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a core way to feel validation and connection, right? So, I mean, I think basic advice is that so far. If it made sense, you tell
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Recognizing if you are a boy or a man, or if you're a girl or a woman is so important. And I would say that I would add to that is that to also recognize what is a boy and what is a man and what is a girl and what is a woman is also extremely crucial. And that's something I had to learn this year. I unfortunately I had to learn the hard way between what is a girl and what is a woman. The beginning of this year, I was going through a courtship and it ended, the girl had ended the courtship because she had told me that she had talked to her mom and her aunts about their experiences with marriage. And they all described these negative experiences that they had. And then the girl turns around and ends the courtship. And she tells me, well, this is what happened. I talked to my mom, my aunts about it. They had negative experiences, and I'm not looking forward to marriage anymore. And just on a dime, it ends. And looking
Yeah.
back at that today, right? So it's September, that was back in January. Looking back at that today, it's like, oh, that was a girl. And it's like, okay, well, it should have, it's not much of a surprise.
Mm. And it's also a great example, if I may add, of a courtship that was happening from probably without both sides of families knowing, which meant that the unpredictability factor of dating now exists in a Muslim courtship process, right? Because again, if it's just about me and her, I can end it, she can end it, and it's like there's no mom and dad to call each other, or there's nothing formal or expected or awareness of what's going on. So then we take the same risks as if we're dating Mary or Jane. It doesn't matter if she's hijabi or Muslim at that point, right? Because we've taken out that hudud, those boundaries. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
But being a boy or a girl is more likely to come out in such situations, right? And they can come out just as much if my parents are involved, right? Especially if my parents are over involved and I'm being treated like a boy and a girl the whole time. That would be a situation where, irrelevant of the families being aware, it's probably still not a healthy process for the two people trying to get married because they're being treated like kids. And then they're expected to be mature, responsible, all of it, adults, within a week after their party, right? It's like not practical.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I made that very clear. Like when I began the courting process almost 3 years ago, I actually sat down to talk with my mother and father about like my expectations, how I want to handle this. And to be honest, I went into it with a lot of assumptions that they were going to be adverse to my perspective. They weren't going to agree with me. And much to my surprise, they actually agreed with virtually everything I said, that, you can marry who you want. They've always said to me that, as long as you're happy, right? Like that's something that they've always said to me. As long as I'm happy, that's good for them. And I think it's very crucial for a young Muslim man or a young Muslim woman that if they want to get married, just talk to your parents first. Like really talk to them about it. Like talk to them, tell them that you're going to start this process. Have that conversation with them, that open dialogue, because they may already have something in mind. They probably already do have not just something in mind, but someone in mind for you, right? So you want to set those expectations clear from the beginning.
Right. Yeah, that way if your parents do, you know, um, some parents are, mashallah, they're very helpful, right? They really do try to arrange good potentials for their kids. So them having a reference is very important, you know? I mean, I know a gentleman who single in his 30s, still lives with his parents, dude. His mom just learned this year what he really likes. Like she always thought he wants what she desired for him. Turns out he's more into more of a exotic palette than she ever imagined, right? And so it's like that stuff is important to know,
Yeah.
right? Not to project. But I think we can explore more of these topics, inshallah, in a future podcast, because there's a lot to cover.
Yeah. Yeah, inshallah. Absolutely. So, like obviously I am personally in premarital counseling myself. I've been doing premarital counseling. Would you recommend people to, even if they're single and let's say they're not even courting someone at this time, should
Mhm.
they still consider premarital counseling just at least for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I would see premarital counseling as personal counseling, because in order to learn about the masculine or the feminine, you have to first start by, what did I say? Step one, what's your grasp of your own self-awareness, right? Because even the things I expect or wish for or desire in a man or a woman has to do with my projections, has to do with my fantasies, my trauma, my needs, my lack of things in my life that I want overcompensated in my spouse. Like we all have our issues, right? So that is premarital counseling, is learning who you are, the person. Because a marriage, ladies and gentlemen, is a third entity born of the man and woman, right? That's all it is. So as good as marriage is equals how good is this person and this person in combination with each other. That's why if one person excels in a relationship, it's self-awareness, physical health, emotional health, and regulation. The other person stays the same. The relationship suffers.
Hmm.
It doesn't stay the same. So naturally, if I'm coming in more self-aware, more healed, more understand my defense mechanisms, my projections, how I regulate things, things I struggle with, what are my traumas, how they may still affect me, say all that, knowing what your program is very important before you go, share a network, let's say, right? It's like you got to know what you're getting yourself into. Like every person is like their own planet, dude, with climate and atmosphere and you know land topography, and it's like you didn't know it was so rough in this area, but it's so soft and tender in this. It's like, yeah, because people are always simple and complex at the same time, right? It's like,
Yeah.
there's some basic things that we all I want and identify with. We all want to be loved. We all want to be happy. We all want to be healthy. We all want this. We all want that. But it means different things to people based on their historical programming as a person.
So
So that's the first step.
what would someone expect in a premarital counseling session?
So, for example, it would be that first session would be about trying to help the person recognize, number one, we can learn, let's say, relationship education, right? Male and female psychology. Like some guys have no woman skills, dude. Like that's part of their premarital and personal counseling, right? Like they don't really get women. And that's not their fault. Like they just, some of them didn't grow up with sisters. They were very sheltered, right? So that's a way they're going to learn. We never stop learning, and education is important to, it's almost like it turns the lights on of your mind, right? But only with and then with those lights, you can see what's in front of you and do practical things with it. That's why you always have to try and practice and experience something you've learned in order for it to become knowledge. Otherwise, it remains information. And if it's not associated with a behavior, that information will eventually evaporate and it'll be as if you never learned it, right? That's why certain things stick and certain things don't, because there's always an associative, conscious, link to it in the person, emotional, behavioral, or otherwise, right? And so premarital counseling begins with the exploration of self-awareness, right? Because I'm only going to be as, like some people, for example, they say, I want to do premarital counseling. I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. How do I do this? And I'm like, well, what do you bring to the table?
Mm.
And a lot of people don't always answer that stuff really clearly or right away. They're like, huh? Like, what are you actually bringing to the table for this person? Do you know what you do? What are you giving? What do you have? Right? Because a lot of times, again, depending on our programming, we see marriage as just an extension or utility of our family expectation or our personal utility, right? So
Yeah.
I want a husband who does this and does that, and I want a woman who's like this and like that. It's like, well, what are you like? What are you going to give? What do you bring to the table? What value do you have? Why should they marry you over the infinite other potentials that exist right now on the planet? We got to think about stuff like that. And that's part of
Yeah.
premarital counseling because it's part of personal counseling, right?
Yeah. I was also in the phase of doing the whole biodata thing of trying to get married, right? Like you send your biodata, whatever. And I had my sort of biodata revamped, if you will. And it was just so much more personable. Like, right, it started off with, I mean, I don't have it with me, but from what I can remember, it started off by saying, I love my coffee in the morning after Fajr, and I like it a little bitter and a little sweet, and it was just extremely personable. And I remember when I used this sort of biodata on these websites and even on Salams, to be honest, I would have sisters tell me like I had this one sister, she told me that when she read it, she was like, I felt like I was connecting to a human. Finally, she said. She's like, I finally felt like I was connecting to a human. Because most of these
Wow.
biodatas is like, I'm because like my old biodata used to be like, I'm 5'11". I'm from Pakistan. I listen to this podcast, Islamic podcast. I like this, like, Nasheed artist, right? It was so basic and dull, and like there was no life or energy. There was no heart in those biodatas.
You made it meaningful and personable, right? Which
Yeah.
made you connect
Yeah.
to people that were also looking for that same thing, right? And so that's a great example of that. It's there's a lot of biodatas that are very cold and third person. Like the mom's not even shy. She's like, my daughter, mashallah, this, my daughter, that, my daughter went to school here. She's this, she's that, and that's usually more about the parents selling their kids to each other, right? You're
Yeah.
actually representing yourself when you have a profile like this, right?
Hmm.
That's also a different distinction, and that's also a sign of whether or not you're a boy or a girl. Is if your mom or dad's writing it for you to show other parents, right? That's you're not
Yeah.
an adult. You're being pawned. You're basically a sale between a family, right? It's like, do you want? What do you think of it? It's like, but again, there's nothing wrong with your parents being involved as long as you're involved and it's your voice.
Yes.
You understand? Like
Yes.
if you guys sit down and write your bio data together, or you write your own, and then you have mom check it out, your mom's like, dude, this is so refreshing because I've read so many other bio datas, and they're like, I love yours, son. This is so personal. Like that, there's nothing that's good. Get the feedback from your parents, especially if they care about you and want you to succeed in this, right?
Yeah.
So but it's a great sign, right? It shows you the
Mhm.
importance of being sincere and authentic as a person, which doesn't come easily for a lot of people who lack self-awareness. Another reason to do counseling, right? It's because if I've been programmed all my life that I'm good and proper when I am like this and act this way and believe this way, there's no other reason for me to think I'm not self-aware or authentic, right?
Hmm.
Because I'm constantly being programmed and conditioned and validated when I follow this protocol. So that's why sometimes when we go through a fitna, a tragedy in life or a tension in life or a travel or you do something individually, it breaks you out of that mold, which is why adolescents tend to be the way they are because they're at that age where they're like, they want to individuate so bad. Because it's like, imagine you're awakening to, dude, all my life I've just been my parents' kid. Now I'm 12, 13, 14, 15, I'm reaching puberty. People are giving me attention and connecting with me based on different terms and values that my parents have always taught me. This is who you are. This is what makes you good. that's existential crack open for
Mm.
people, right? So that's why
Yeah.
teenagers love spending time with their friends more than family, because they get to explore the contours of themselves, and there's no judgment, right? And there's always a place they feel accepted and bonded. We don't always get that with our own damn family,
Mm.
right? So naturally, it's hard to compete with when you look at that. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So we sort of talked about like what a person could expect in a premarital counseling session if it's just him or her and the counselor. But what about if there is a guy and a girl and they're considering marriage, they're in that courting process together, and they both go into that premarital counseling session together? What are some things that they both could expect?
Oh, that's even better setup. That in that situation, my process is still I would have personal sessions with each individual to learn more of who they are. And then that would be in parallel to what we call teamwork, where we begin exploring and practicing and facilitating activities and educational content that will teach them how to engage, communicate in a healthy way, to understand what are basic human conditions and needs that we have, both male and female, as well as some of those distinctions because of our physiology and psychology and even cosmology, if that's part of our worldview, right? And so typically we cover things like communication skills, self-awareness, family and heritage, which connects to our needs, expectations in marriage, right? Understandings of these kind of big fluffy terms like love and appreciation and respect, and try and understand what these things actually mean to us. And does that mean, me being respected or loved by my spouse actually mean something to me, Karim, or is it just what I've been taught to say about love and respect because that's how my parents are, or that's how they reacted, or even if I witnessed my family disrespect each other or not be loving, that's my program. Like, I don't know any better, right? So all those things we have to wake up to. And premarital counseling is a way for us to address things that are practical, and learn things that we may have never known. And I have heard it so many times, Noman. I wish I knew this before I got married. And those are people who wish they did premarital counseling or premarital education or book or read or explore. Like, we spend more time planning our parties and weddings and rukshatis than we do actually investing in our own human psychology and healing and relationship skills, right? Or life skills, right?
Mm.
So that's typically what we do is focus on self-awareness, communication, and then exploring values and where they come from and why. And that has a lot to do with our family background. And then with that grounding, we're able to then look into how we want to pave the future forward, right? And then we examine things like families and is there current tension between families? Because that's always usually part of some program, right? A family process, right? It's like either the families are getting along really well or there's some tension, and those things have to be dealt with because they affect that couple, right? Especially if I am very enmeshed or codependent in my family system, right? That's gonna play a big role in my premarital problems, right? It's like some people, their problems premaritally are actually not their problems, like the couple. They're problems that the mom made for them,
Mm.
right? There are
Mm.
problems that one child can't get over because they know the parents won't accept or this, or they don't have so all of that you have to look into, right? But anyways, there's a lot to cover. We can inshallah go into more details at a future show.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Kareem, where can people find you online?
I'm barely online, but I do have a website, notehumanconsulting.com. I do have, of course, Instagram and all these things. I just haven't been active much.
Mm.
Frankly, it's because Alhamdulillah, Allah's kept me very productive and busy work-wise. And I have, a growing big family, mashallah.
Inshallah.
But you can find me at notehumanconsulting.com. I also have a Coffee with Kareem podcast, and hope to promote your show there too as well, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And yeah, coffeewithkareem.com, newhumanconsulting.com. That'll take you to everything else.
Okay, sounds good, man. Kareem, I really appreciate you being on the show today, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and bless your work. I know you're doing a
Um,
lot of great work, and I know that you have helped hundreds of people over the course of your work. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for each and every amount of it and making it means that you are given Jannah, inshallah.
Ameen, Ya Rab. Ameen. And may Allah also give you the best in this life and the next in your family. And look forward to our next meeting, inshallah. It was a pleasure, Sidi Noma. Jazakallah khair.
Inshallah. Wa alaikum, habibi.